Ludlam.
Here. Thanks, Mr. Acting Deputy President. I rise to make the first real contribution, I suppose, since the 2013 election, that we've had such an extraordinary long period of time since this parliament last sat. Was starting to think that perhaps the government was enjoying the respite from transparency, but nonetheless, here we are. It is great to be back. Nonetheless, holding quite a degree of apprehension about what's to come and the work that's ahead of us. It is the first opportunity that I've had to thank my team that carried me through an extraordinary election campaign, Felicity and Chantal, who were here with me during the sitting week, and back in Fremantle, Ray, Trish, Giovanni and Eloise. People behind the scenes who, if ever we sound across our brief and eloquent in here, you know that it's because we have good staff. The extended Greens WA team, in particular Irma, Katrina, Nina, Jane and Harrison, who really threw everything that they had, mobilising a wonderful Greens WA campaign for season 2013. And to my dear colleague Rachel Seward and her team, Senator Seward, who I worked for in this place before taking up my own position here in 2007. And of course to Christine Milne and the larger team, a hard-fought campaign and a difficult campaign, and also my first opportunity to congratulate the once future and current member for Melbourne, Adam Bant. Of course, for most of us, after September 7, those in the House of Reps got on with life, or got on with packing up their offices. And for us in Western Australia, noting my West Australian colleague Senator Louise Pratt is here with us in the chamber as well, the journey appeared to be only just beginning. We spent a week in appeals at a very, very close count, and on appeal won a recount in Western Australia. Many votes were found, obviously not just by Green scrutineers, but by those who turned up for the Labor Party, and a handful for the Palmer United Party. A 2.5-week recount, and wanting to thank my former state parliamentary colleague Giz Watson in particular for marshalling up a remarkable scrutineering team, a razor-thin change in the order of the fallout of the West Australian count, but of course everybody baffled and immensely frustrated to discover that a batch of votes had been lost on the way through the recount. First Senate recount since I think 1980, and then the probably the most serious breach of this sort of thing in the Electoral Commission's history, as they've put it. And now I suspect we're in the hands of the courts, and more than likely another ballot in Western Australia next year. And it occurred to me during the late stages of the recount, we had a number of friends and allies from the eastern states who made their way to WA to help the huge scrutineering team. One of them, a friend and former intern here, Alex, and others who came to scrutineer for WA, gave us an opportunity to show off our gorgeous state to people from across the country who lent a hand to the very hard-working locals. And in one of the brief moments of respite and break that we gave her, taking time to have a swim off the coast of WA, was hit by a species of stinger, very rarely seen in WA, and certainly not this early in the season. And it caused, apart from needing to apologise that West Australia's beaches are obviously a little bit more dangerous than they look from the shoreline, it brought home to me and others, I suppose, the reason why we do this work in the first place. The very fact that the oceans are sinking such vast quantities of heat that is being absorbed by the atmosphere and sunk by the ocean is warming the currents off the west coast of Australia, warming the Lewin Current. We're seeing extraordinary and quite atypical oceanic warming, which is bringing subtropical species, marine species, fish and others, much further down the coast, and certainly much sooner in the season than we are used to. Gary Jackson, who's a principal research scientist for the Department of Fisheries, has been monitoring changes in fish distribution off the south coast of WA, and he says, spoke to the ABC just earlier this month. He says, we've got a whole portfolio of reports coming in through the last 2 to 3 years of some pretty unusual fish occurring south of Geraldton, off Perth, as far around as Capes on the south coast. So strange things are happening, and we're only really starting to scratch the surface now of what's going on. And the fact is, and referring back for me, it brought home the human impacts of climate change. One visitor, one guest to Western Australia who has found through direct personal experience that things are changing in our part of the world. Things are changing no matter where you're from. One of my favourite things about working in this chamber is that we get to meet people from all over the country who bring these diverse perspectives to bear. Things are changing in your states and territories as well. If you thought to, you could bring direct stories of direct personal experience of what it means to live in the age of climate change, in the age of global warming. Your constituents will be telling you, and the fingerprints are everywhere. We get a 0.5 further degree rise in temperature. It was modelled for WA. We get the disappearance of 26 of the 92 dryandra species in the southwest of WA. We lose 2/3 of dryandras upon a 2-degree temperature rise. We lose all the acacia species. By 2030, as the climate in Margaret River will become much closer to that of Perth, as Perth is starting to get Carnarvon or Geraldton's climate regime, there will be no white wines coming out of the Swan Valley anymore. These are things that we can see approaching, and we can map these onto the things that we can see occurring right now. West Australia's crayfish industry is one of the best managed fisheries in the country. Senator McDonald will know a little of this as a former fisheries minister. A well-managed fishery, good local and community support, has been hit very, very hard by changes to the marine environment and changes to the way that our oceans are responding to that massive sinking of heat that they are having to absorb. And that is something that actually has the potential of wiping that fishery out completely. We're already seeing severe impacts. And so we know, and I know as a West Australian through direct experience, that map on to what the scientific community is telling us about how the climate is changing around us. And it doesn't make much sense to try and wind the clock back and prevent these things from happening because they're with us now. What we are able to do, of course, is to look forward and say, what can we do if we listen to those who we entrust and with the scientific expertise, the people who spend their lives hoping to goodness that they're wrong about what's coming down the line, but those who have developed that expertise, they tell us, change course now. Not in 2030, not in 2050, not in 2060, change course now. Again, one of my favourite things about this job, the people that we get to meet and deal with, are representatives from the US-based firm Solar Reserve. They started business in 2007. They now have 25 projects coming on stream with a potential output of 3,000 megawatts. That's a substantial fraction of the whole southwest grid. And Solar Reserve builds solar thermal power stations, utility-scale power stations that can run 24/7 after dark, as responsive as a gas-fired power station but running on sunlight. They're building one of the largest solar power plants, 110 meg plant in the Nevada desert. They're shopping around Western Australia looking at potentially opening an office. And I suspect that will go to the wall now because of policy changes that are afoot in this building this week to turn their back and slam the door on the sunrise industries of the 21st century, something that might actually give us a chance, not of dealing with the existing changes to our climate that are washing through, but to the catastrophic impacts of the near term, those things that are still avoidable. These clean technology companies have the ability to offset the kind of holocaust that we are driving our economy, our society and our environment towards. We know as well, of course, that solar is not just for the big guys because some of the biggest advances have been made at the household level. More than 130,000 solar PV installations on Western Australian homes. On a good day, on a sunny day at peak, that can be generating 10% of the electrons running through the southwest grid. Premier Barnett, of course, realising that the game is up for the black power generators while pumping nearly $400 million into trying to resurrect the obsolete Muja coal-fired power station, again trying to hold back the tide. The future is actually here and it is becoming more widely distributed. What those householders in WA who installed PV, what those large-scale solar utility developers could do with, what people wanting to put in public transport, preserve their urban bushland and protect our fisheries, what they could do with is some leadership from this building. For those in the coalition who have the blindfolds on, or perhaps those who I can speak to who know that climate change is real, to have a quick word with the boss and see if we can avoid some of the worst of the catastrophic damage that's bearing down upon us. I thank the chamber.